All right. What's up? What's up? What's up? Hey, 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 hey. What's up, everybody? Hopefully, y'all are doing super duper well on this amazing what is it? Monday? You know what I'm saying? But we are here. Welcome back to the Inner Storyteller. Welcome back to this channel and the Ufulu Child channel. It is your humble host, Soul Expression, and I am super duper happy to get into today's topic. Now, we touched on this topic on Saturday, 2 days ago, and today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this topic. As you can see, the title of the video, the Rockefellers did what to the school system? It's just a bit of a part two to government schooling is the religion of government. And I have a nice presentation, set up for you guys. But before that, some housekeeping. Of course, please remember, like the video, subscribe to the channels. If you're here, then you're here for real conversations about natural law, religion, the good, the bad, and the ugly, money, anarchy, culture, and how mankind is manipulated by forces that don't have our best interests at heart. Okay. Also, we're going to talk a lot about religion and faith systems, but we are not bashing faith systems in this channel. We are simply observing the psychological affects and effects of the stories that we have the most faith in, the stories that have taken, the biggest toll on us. And without further ado, let me just make sure. Let me get this off of here. There we go. Yeah, like I said, we're not gonna bash any faith systems, right? We are gonna examine the stories, the affects and effects of the stories that we have the most stake in and the most faith in, and how those stories help shape society and have helped shape the current society that we're already in. What are the fruits of these religions? We're going to examine that. That examination sits right alongside an honest look, right, at the current condition of the human family. The current condition of the human family is slavery. Government is slavery. And government is what we have all around the world. Therefore, the entire human family is engaged in one or the other side of enslavement. And that is our current condition. And the question that we keep coming back to is what can actually be improved with a proper and intimate understanding of the inner storyteller. If that makes sense, great. Like the video, subscribe to the channels. If that makes you uneasy, you're welcome to stay. You're encouraged to stay. You are also welcome to leave. With that being said, before we actually get into, I have a presentation prepared for you guys. I want to show you something from that I just posted to Instagram because I was like, yo, this is crazy. I was just talking about this. And now, I see it pop up on Instagram. So I even remixed it. So I put it right at the top of my own page. Check this out.
What were you actually trained to do? You were trained to sit still for 8 hours. You were trained to memorize instructions. You were trained to raise your hand to ask for permission to speak or even to go to the bathroom. You were trained to fear failure. And above all, you were trained to complete tasks given to you by a superior authority. These are not the skills of an owner. These are the skills of a compliant worker. The school system was designed in the Prussian era to produce soldiers and factory workers. It was never designed to produce capitalists. Think about your school years. What were you actually trained to do? You were trained to sit still for 8.
All right. What were you actually, factually trained to do? Now, Just kind of take in that video. And because he said it so eloquently and succinctly and quickly that some of the fine details may have been missed or just may feel so heavy that you don't want me to move on just yet. And I resonate with that if that's you, because sit still for 8 hours. Does that if I describe to you a child in their natural, childlike state, does sit still for 8 hours naturally come out my mouth, like naturally come to mind when you think of children? No, of course not. Right? Does now this one is more so for the parents, for the parents and the teachers. Um, so aunties and uncles, hold on for this question. No offense, no judgment. Um, Does blind obedience and perfect obedience to authority naturally come up when we speak about a child, an adolescent, a child somewhere in, under 18 and over 2 or 3, right? When you get to about 5 or 6 up through 18, does super duper blind obedience come to mind naturally, come out naturally when describing children? Hell no. Heck no, it don't. What else did he say? He said, we were trained to memorize instructions. That's right. We were trained to memorize instructions. We're going to get into that in the presentation, so I'm not going to jump ahead of myself, but just take that in. We're trained to memorize instructions. This is the way you do this. Now, of course, safety instructions are fine. Safety instructions are on a completely different playing field. But not every instruction is a safety instruction. Okay, some instructions are there because we want you to do it this way, not because there's only one way to do it safely, right? Or because you have to take these precautions to do it safely. No. Some instructions are given, a lot of instructions are, most instructions, I would postulate as my opinion, are given because I want you to do it this way and not any other way. And this is what the school system is all about, right? So let's put this here and dive into our presentation. All right. Government schooling is the religion of government. Now, I'm going to try to manage this here. You're going to hear some clicking, okay? You might hear some clicking and then see my eyes dart and start to read something. Don't worry about any of that, okay? It's all good. Here we go. The Inner Storyteller with Soul Expression presents Government Schooling is the Religion of Government, where we are going to dive deeply into the work of John Taylor Gatto. And I'm going to call him Gatto. I don't know if he pronounced it Gato or Gatto, but I'm going to say Gatto. 30 years inside the machine, dumbing us down, only to become the most, one of the most influential whistleblowers of what happened in time, in all time, at least when it comes to the, American side of the school system. But I've been to other countries. I've seen other schooling practices, and they're very similar. Anywhere that there's a central bank, it's very similar, I would say. I'm not going to say it's the same. I'm going to say it's very similar. So here we go. Firstly, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. And I think this is a direct quote from John Taylor Gatto, New York State Teacher of the Year, 1991. And I believe he won that for 3 years. And on his 3rd year, he decided to publicly indict the school system on the day he received Teacher of the Year. Pretty epic stuff. he came to his conclusion that the school system isn't broken. It's working exactly how it's supposed to work because the schools are not failing to educate. What he says is they are succeeding, right? They're not failing at education. They're succeeding at something else entirely, right? They are spectacularly successful, I would say, in doing what they were really intended to do, which is what we're going to get into. And I want to hammer that home a couple different times, which is why I'm leaving it on the screen. And here we go. Now, again, system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It says, after 30 years inside the New York City public schools, Gatto concluded that the schools are not failing to educate. They are succeeding in something else entirely, producing obedient workers and passive citizens. An obedient worker is not going to question the 8-hour workday. Instead of working over 8 hours for overtime, you actually have to work over 40 hours per week for overtime, even if you work a 17-hour day on Monday and then Tuesday you're off, and whatnot. Just any of the nonsense. This 2 weeks before you get paid instead of getting paid every week or getting paid every day. The working conditions and working environment, and how fast these bosses and CEOs demand that things are done so that they can provide for expansions in their empire, in their business empire. All of these things that we are just blindly obedient to, we got to that by way of the school system being spectacularly, again, successful at what it was intended to produce. Okay. And passive citizens, right? Behind the obedient worker is the passive citizen. Behind the, let me make sure my camera's still working. Okay. Cool. Looks like we're good. Behind the worker, the factory worker, the laborer, the construction guy, or whatever, behind his identity as a worker is his identity as a citizen. And one's identity as a citizen is going to produce either active citizenship, where you're actively, participating in the structure of your government and how it runs, especially the local side, or passively. And the school system intended to take out the gumption of those who would be active citizens and decided that they want mostly passive citizens. And if you look around, they were completely successful. And he announced this while accepting the highest honor that the school system could give him. Again, a pretty epic guy, pretty epic in his execution. Now, what your child is actually being taught. Okay, these are the 7 hidden lessons in Gatto's work. What your child is actually being taught. 1 is confusion. Everything is taught out of context, right? Everything. In this unit, we're going to talk about this. Okay, cool. And then that unit ends. In this unit, we're going to talk about this completely unrelated other piece of history or other piece of science or other piece of music or other piece of give your subject. Everything is taught out of context. Everything is taught divided. And the unrelating of everything is a part of the programming for the inner storyteller, right? Disconnection. Too much presented too fast with no coherent thread connecting almost any of it. And this even goes for history class and social studies, where we learn to memorize dates in isolation and call it history, right? History is just like mathematics. History can build on itself from grade to grade, but instead, except for the fact that there's more advanced vocabulary introduced, you could take a third grade, maybe not third, a fifth grade history lesson in eighth grade and not know that you switched into a fifth grade textbook. If again, maybe some of the vocabulary is more advanced in like eighth grade, but instead of chronologically and with a connectivity to science and to shop and various classes where you may explore technology, to nature based lessons, and obviously to did I say science already? To science. Without these connections that history class and social studies class, you're oh, excuse me, without the chronological order being applied and just learning what happened as you grow up, there's a big disconnection intended to be in the school system, and it's something that hopefully should unlock, like, damn, like, yeah, I really don't know history. If you went through the public school system, you probably don't know history that well, right? And even if you've memorized all of the dates up till today, like I'm 34, I'll be 35 this year. If you've memorized all of the dates ever since you left school decades ago, right? Even if you have those still memorized, you might not understand history in its proper context. You might not understand certain movements or the impact that certain people or certain inventions had on society. And you definitely don't likely have any idea about what the occult was able to do, the dark occult, the social engineers and sorcerers that shape forge and then shape the mind control methodology that's employed on the public today through propaganda and poisoning and all of the things that they're using. The second not lesson, but the second thing that your child is actually being taught is called class position. Okay. You are taught to know your place. You are taught to accept your place. You are taught that classes of people is a real thing, right? When you're taught that, let's say that you look at the story of Gandhi, and you talk about the Indian caste system and things like that, and there's these classes of people and glass ceilings in between each one. You're not taught it from the perspective that morality dictates that this is wrong, or from the perspective that, and this trains people to be obedient, even if the perceived authority is doing evil acts, has been deemed and, let's say, correctly deemed untrustworthy, but they're still obedient because of the class, because of the second class, third class status that they're given from authorities. This class position, it's very deep, man. It's very deep. I want to try to, say things that are kind of broad, but also bring things down to real world examples. Obviously, there's the Dred Scott case, right? Declaring that the classification of Negro, okay, counts as 3/5 of a man, because if the Negro class gets to start voting, then they're going to vote in people that are not advancing our agenda. So actually, the Negro was 3/5 of a man. Their vote don't count as a whole vote, right? Dred Scott case, 14th Amendment. We're not going to get into certain legal truths right now. We will on this podcast, but not right now. I have to prepare my presentation for those. But regardless, you were taught to know your place, to accept your place, and the grading system also enforces a hierarchy that most students will never escape, right? Because your grades, your GPA, also becomes a status, especially by high school. Uh, the types of classes that you're in, AP, honors, um, the slow class, as we used to call it in school, uh, special ed. You know, that's a status symbol. That's a class position, and that's one of the other things that your child is actually being taught. And then we have indifference. Okay, and this is an emotional lesson. This is a lesson that tugs on the heartstrings and the heart-based understanding, the heart-based intelligence of the child, and basically strips them of some of their humanity. The lesson of indifference. Students are made indifferent um, to the subjects that they learn, right? Because the subjects are not connected to one another. The teachers are not making it a point to connect them in any meaningful sense, especially again with the look at history and technology, in science, as well as, you know, other things in science like medicine and health and food and things like that. Would just be completely indifferent. These subjects, just memorize these answers to the test, take the test, pass the test, forget the information, move on to the next set of memorized facts and or opinions, and take the next test. Pass that test, forget that information, move on to the next. Students are taught to be indifferent to the subjects that they learn. Okay, and it's built into the design, and it was intended to do this, and it's doing it very successfully. They're made to feel indifferent about each other, right? Everybody's in trouble. It doesn't matter who started it. I don't care who started it. Who started it is the only thing that matters. And why are we treating children as if noise is some sort of social offense by itself? It's not. Or disruption of any kind is morally bad, and therefore, we have to take drastic measures to make sure that there's no disruption of any kind whatsoever to a lesson. Now, there are plenty of types of disruptions that should not happen and should be nipped in the bud, and maybe everybody gets punished for it if it keeps happening, if that's really called for in a case by case basis. But teachers take it too far, and the system was designed to encourage teachers to take it too far. There are a lot of very, very good teachers with very, very bad habits that they don't see as bad because they're doing it better than their teacher did it, so to speak. It's not a diss on teachers. But students are made to feel indifferent towards each other, and largely that is teachers' fault by way of how they are told that they can administer discipline. They're told how they are allowed to discipline, and then they, try and fit in those boxes and do what they have to do. And that causes them to come up with these habits, and as well as, weighs on their stress levels and things. And eventually the child is feeling indifferent to their peers as well as the teacher. The bell rings, and whatever you were just engaged in stops mattering immediately. Now, this part, and keep this in the context of indifference, right? The bell rings, and this super important part of science, of chemistry that you're engaged in right now doesn't matter at all. Not only are you have you been yearning to go to somewhere else and just be talking with your friends and hanging out um, very badly under the lesson? Your teacher is tired of y'all class by that time. It's just like everybody is just, as soon as the bell rings, sighing a big sigh of relief. Oh, finally, I get a break from learning. Finally, I get a break from whatever, and I get to walk in the hallway for 5 minutes until my next class starts. And or the students are leaving finally until my next class gets here. I get a moment to myself or something like that, or I get to a moment to just socialize with my favorite students. This bell that operates like lights out at the prison also engages the same psychological function in the brain, where something is rendered unimportant, right? What is important is the bell. What is important is the permission. What is important is what the authority has set up as the structure that you have to follow. What's not important, the subject matter, when that is the only thing that's really important. Right? And then you repeat for 12 years. Let's move on. After indifference, we have emotional dependency. Okay, emotional dependency. And of course, the indifference subject in the indifference category bleeds into this one. But students are made emotionally dependent on the approval and validation of the authority figures around them for their sense of worth and direction. By the time you're in middle school, sometimes high school, or excuse me, middle school, definitely high school, there are counselors. There is the counseling aspect to teaching, where students, relate to their favorite teacher and they confide in them for various things. And the teacher is sometimes trained to deal with that, or sometimes not, but they're just naturally inclined to help their students. And because that is mixed in with the structure of 8 hours a day, no contact to the outside world while you're in the building, or very minimal. Just the structure of it all, right? Like I said, you go to lunch when we say so, the bell changes what you're doing and dictates that you're just indifferent to everything. Students are made emotionally dependent on the approval and validation of the authorities within that building and within that structure. And when they get validation from them, they feel better. And when they don't get the validation from them, they feel sometimes very, very disturbed internally. Right? And then obviously, if we have emotional dependency within the four walls of the classroom or the four walls of the building, so to speak, we also have intellectual dependency. Okay. And of course, they're made intellectually dependent by way of how they're trained. Students are trained to wait for the expert, which is the teacher or the movie or the textbook, to tell them what to think. Behind that, to tell them what matters in the information, what parts of the information to pay attention to. And, because what that means is this is the correct answer for your closest upcoming tests and quizzes and standardized tests. And so you have to memorize what this correct answer is. And then when you pass the test, if you forget it forever, then that's fine. So we're intellectually dependent on the expert. That's why the logical fallacy of appealing to authority is so widely used in propaganda. When news anchors or podcasters start talking about truth seekers and truth tellers in such a way that they're like, oh, you're, what do they say? Something, appeal to authority, because you're not a gender studies expert, you don't know anything about gender. or something like that. Because you didn't take 11 classes in college to study gender, you don't know anything about it. Just to name an example. Now, next we have provisional self-esteem, right? And this is another biggie. This is another one that you can see as early as second grade, third grade, taking full effect. Provisional self-esteem. Students are taught students are taught a kind of self-confidence that requires constant confirmation by experts. Okay, right? You got it. A plus, 100%, 88%. Um, and this bleeds into your worth, right? This bleeds into your worth. Another thing is, who's the quietest in the line? Who's the quietest? Oh, Sally. Sally, you get to be my line leader, Sally. You are so quiet and respectful, and you're not jumping up and down, and you're being completely still, and your right finger is raised, and your left finger is over your mouth to remind everybody you're not allowed to speak within these four walls, no matter what. You know, Sally, you get to come up and be my line leader because you are getting the validation right now that you so desperately need from your emotional dependency on me, for being religiously adherent to the structure of the school system. Now, I have nothing against getting from one end of the hall to the other end of the hall without any injuries. It's not about isolating any of these examples that I bring up. I was just an educator for 7 or 8 years, so I've seen a lot of things with my own eyes that I'm able to speak on just from experience. But again, I'm not calling out individual teachers, and I'm definitely not against practicality as a thing. What I'm against is the structure of the school system and our continuance of putting our kids back in there and sending them back. It was Monday morning this morning, and I'm sure your kids went back to school. And I think that's a bad thing. So, again, self-esteem, the students are taught your worth is not inherent to you. Your worth is built by how many times you please your teacher and principal and whatnot. And some students are like that kind of thing. Some students, react to that with, oh, really? I just have to please these people? Okay, done. And they're just kind of going to go with that. But a lot of students, especially a lot of students that come from situations that are not financially well off, okay, and they don't have the resources, they don't have sometimes the parental time or the parental guidance, and their environment is trash everywhere, and sometimes a lot of violence. Okay, there are a lot of people coming from those situations who like as young as first and second grade, reject that attitude, that general atmospheric attitude that the teachers don't really know that they have sometimes. And they reject the notion that their worth is not inherent to them. Right? They seem to know something, feel something about that's false, and they want to rebel against it, and they find little ways to challenge the teacher, and start the pipeline towards the prison system, because they get used to the structure of the school system, which operates discipline very similarly to the prison system. We'll get into that. As a matter of fact, the next block on our chain here after provisional self-esteem is constant surveillance. Constant surveillance. And now like I said, I'll be 35 this year. I remember cameras feeling weird. Like I remember around maybe 6th grade or 7th grade when I went to middle school, just feeling the cameras, even the ones that were just like on the outside of the school, feeling a bit weird. And this is not only about cameras. right? Constant surveillance, it makes it clear to students that they cannot hide because they are always being supervised, meaning privacy is not taught as a right in the structure of the school system. Privacy is given as a privilege. Or if you're sick and you need to go to the nurse's office, you're given some privacy. Other than that, you're always being watched. You're always being evaluated in all of your lessons, in all of your just you're always being supervised within these walls, and 8 hours a day, 100, almost 200 days a year, year after year, 12 years in a row, that gets normalized for you. That becomes normalized in your mind. Not becomes, I was going to say that becomes normal for you, but no, it never really becomes normal. It just becomes the norm around you and becomes accepted and becomes expected. That's the word I was looking for. That becomes expected. And it's very unfortunate because, again, government schooling is the religion of government. And government is who came up with mass surveillance. Okay? Now let's move on here. Now, one of the things that we have to really hammer down in our minds is the fact that this was funded by Rockefeller and Carnegie deliberately in this direction. This is not conspiracy. It's a documented institutional history. Industrial titans recognize enormous profits in cultivating a compliant herd via the public education system. The system was explicitly designed to ensure docile, malleable workforces. Okay, perfected at places like Columbia, Teachers College, and Harvard, and funded by the captains of industry. Of course, we know the Rockefellers are oil, and Carnegie, I believe, is steel. Okay, the people that basically ran the factories that needed all of the workers. Okay. A great number of industrial titans came to recognize the enormous profits to be cultivated by making and tending just such a herd of students via public education. Students, of course, eventually graduate and become workers. Around the end of the 19th century, most influence and money came from industrialists and their financiers like Chase, JP Morgan, right? So I lost my place, my bad. Okay, here we go. Most influence and money came from industrialists and financiers like the steel baron Carnegie and the monopolist oil baron Rockefeller families, and was directed at schools of education and higher learning. The system perfected at places like the University of Chicago, again, Columbia Teachers College, Carnegie Mellon, and Harvard. And they were funded by the captains of industry. This was explicitly set up to ensure a docile, malleable workforce to meet the growing, changing demands of corporate capitalism. This is not a theory. And by understanding this, we can empower ourselves to remove our children from their systems with a conviction that will not fade when enforcement comes and threatens things with guns and, just threatens you with violence. Now we have to understand, and this is the biggest part. This right here is the best statement is the most important part of this entire presentation, which is the fact that we had two systems running at once. An elite, a small elite, right, was being educated much differently than the main population. Okay. The societal system implied by these rules required an elite group of caretakers. Okay. Because we want to make the population a docile, passive group of slaves, we also need to simultaneously create a small group of elite caretakers, elite in their mental capacity, elite in their emotional prowess or toughness, emotional defense, and emotional even offense and attack that they can employ. Um, just elite all around in athletics, whatever. Right? At first, it was like that. Now they don't care if the the little sheep are more athletically inclined. They don't care about that anymore. But at first, it was everything. To that end, a small fraction of students of families will quietly be taught how to manage this continuing project, how to watch over and control an entire population, deliberately dumbed down and declawed in order for government to proceed unchallenged and for corporations that are funding the government to never want for obedient labor, to always have an abundance of obedient laborers. So two systems ran simultaneously, one that produced managers, a very small group of students, and one that produced the managed or the slave class. And the managed are never told which system they are in. Okay, that is the very crux of this whole thing is the managed, the slaves, after a certain, period in time in the early 1900s, late 1800s, when all of this was being planned and then eventually executed, uh, this function, right, the proped, pro, propedeutic propedeutic function, documented in 1918, never discussed in classrooms that it governs. It's never discussed in classrooms that it governs. If you're the slave, we're not going to teach you that. Now, here's the truth, okay, that Gatto was revealing. Genius is as common as dirt. Genius is in every child. Genius is in everyone, actually. But it can be snuffed out. And, there's a thing in your brain called plasticity. There's a property of brain matter called plasticity, where your choices, your mental choices, your patterns of thought and patterns of emotional response, and the movies that you create and rewatch again and again in your mind, as well as the habits that you physically do with your body over and over again, they create pathways that are sometimes difficult to rewrite or redirect of, it's hard to use certain terms. Basically, pathways of thought in your brain, in your mind, in your brain. Excuse me. Your mind holds the thought. Your mind interprets the thoughts, but your brain also does physical things where you can see thoughts are happening, and you can lock in certain patterns of thought that are very difficult to unlock and change and redirect, especially in a way that you change the pathway, that you morph the plastic into a different shape. That takes a lot of effort. Okay, and these systems and structures in the public schooling arena do a very good job at locking in certain pathways in your brain that are extremely hard to break. This process snuffs out the genius in most people, because what it snuffs out is, again, your self-esteem, your self-worth, your ability to question, your ability to explore your own talents at your own pace, your ability to learn at your own pace and through your own learning styles, as well as your ability to connect the subjects that you're learning to yourself and to your own experience in a holistic way. Now, I say all that to say the system destroys genius systematically, pardon me. Over 30 years of classroom experience led Gatto to a revolutionary discovery, which is genius is as common as dirt, but conventional education systematically destroys it. Children arrive curious, imaginative, hungry to understand the world, hungry to understand how they relate to it, and hungry to understand how they can uniquely contribute to the good that they see and like in the world. But the system does not build on that, fact of children. It replaces it with compliance, obedience, waiting your turn, um, waiting for the expert, learned helplessness of someone who has been told for 12 years, for 10 years straight, even 5 years straight, that the answer comes from the textbook or the answer comes from outside of their self, right? The answers come from this adult created, authority created source. And unless you're getting your answers from this expert created source, your answers are always wrong, bar none. Okay, this is the false lesson that we're taught. Another huge factor that goes largely unnoticed is the fact that, and this points to, again, the 8 hours a day paradigm, families are separated, community is separated. Um, what Gatto argues is that compulsory schooling can weaken the bonds between family members and the broader community by monopolizing children's time and attention. Okay. And again, the attention is not just on the the schoolwork content, right? The attention is on, is the bell ringing? Is it lunchtime? Is it baseball or basketball, practice? Is it, did the experts say that? Are they gonna, how they gonna grade my, that is the attention. The attention is on the structure. That's what holds the student's mind and attention. Children may spend more time with teachers and classmates than with their own families. This is very true, and unfortunately, in America at least, it starts as early as daycare, um, which can diminish the role that the family has as the primary source of learning and support. And here's the thing: we have, over my 30 years, 35 years of living, I have definitely encountered far too many adults over 25 years old that feel and even almost advocate for more and more services that allow, like, entrepreneur parents or parents that have, big careers at giant firms, to be able to spend less time with their children. I've heard far too many adults advocate for this thing and say that they think it's a good thing that society is providing all of these things. It's like, it's almost like there's a bowl of poison. There's a bowl of poison water. Okay. Not bowl. There's a glass of poison water, and people are drinking it and dying. And then other people who haven't drank it fully yet, because, some of these people don't even have children, are advocating for and praising the fact that this water has been provided to humanity because it's water and they call it water, even though it's poisonous water. It's almost like that, right? Where we have normalized not raising our kids and allowing the government to raise our kids via school and government provided daycares and government regulated early education and government regulated juvenile facilities and summer school, all of these things. We give our kids to the government for everything, for 2 meals a day, for everything. And then wonder why we're so disconnected by the time that they're a certain age, right? We have lost our title largely as the primary source of learning and support after, 6 years old, 5 years old, which is very unfortunate. Now, of course, Gatto says and argues this is not a side effect, that this was baked into the design on purpose of the modern school system by the families that funded and designed it. A child deeply rooted in family and community is very hard to standardize, meaning is very hard to enslave, right? Frederick Douglass, an educated man, is unfit to be a slave, right? Well, a family connected child is unfit to be a slave in the same way. Severing the root connection to their family makes the child way more available to institutional formation and way more vulnerable to the same. Now, schools are networks, not communities. Comes straight out of his work, Gatto's work, John Taylor Gatto. And that difference is everything, as it says, right? A network does not really emotionally care for you. A network is transactional. Gatto draws a sharp and rarely discussed distinction between communities and networks in his work, and communities are explained to be complex relationships of commonality and shared obligation, something that we talk about very heavily on this podcast. Whereas networks don't require the whole person. A network only requires a very narrow piece of a person. So schools even though they need your body there for 8 hours a day, okay, sometimes 9-10 hours a day if you got basketball practice or whatever. If you're in a school play, if you're in the band and it's football season, whatever, right? Schools do not require the holistic human being who is serving as a student, because they're networks. They only need the student piece of the kid, right? Not the curious one, not the one that's maybe grieving their grandma, not the spiritually sensitive one, definitely not the wild one. They don't need all of these pieces of the student. They only need the student piece, which sits still, follows instructions, memorizes instructions, produces measurable outputs and outcomes in alignment with the standardization of the human being. Because the rest of the human being is inconvenient for this structure. The rest of the human being is a nuisance and a bother to those who designed the structure and who were successful in converting the adults who are not educators and teachers directly perpetuating this system to believe some of the same things that the teachers believe about how inconvenient it is for somebody to be authentically themselves. He called it the psychopathic school. Okay, so this is the psychopathic school. One of his chapters, called The Psychopathic School, is extremely significant and connects directly to my inner storyteller work. Not as just provocation, but as diagnosis. Psychopathy is, in his eyes, a direct, analogous condition that can be the fruit, the outcome of someone brought through this system, or of many people if millions and millions of people are brought through this similar structure. Okay, it can be designed to produce psychopathic tendencies, even if it's not designed to directly produce psychopaths in the real clinical sense. He discusses the link between the way we teach our children and the problems they manifest, some said problems are we have no sense of past or future. We're completely, disconnected from each other emotionally. We lack the ability to pay attention. Our attention spans are super small. We don't have a sense of anything being really important until, we have kids, or until we find out we were vaccine injured, or until something tragic happens, somebody dies, whatever. Until something tragic happens, we don't really find anything besides entertainment and fun important, right? And this is another thing that Gatto argues is baked directly into the school system. These are the predictable outputs of a system that was designed to produce exactly these traits in the population. It does not select for leadership. Now, again, there's two systems running at once. Okay. You have the system of the elites, and the elites do not put their kids in government schools. They do not get their kids vaccinated. They do not feed their children processed sugars. If they are grooming their children to be leaders, they don't. They do not allow their kids to drink tap water. They do not. There's just so many things, man. There's so many differences. But there's two systems running simultaneously, and you're not ever going to hear it discussed in the Goyim class, in the slave class, in the second class, lower class citizen class, which system they're in, and what are the properties and goals of the other system. That will never be discussed. Okay. Now, after 100 years of mandatory schooling, what do we see? What do we find? Did the outcomes get better? Are we smarter as a society? Are we less violent as a society? Are we more innovative than 100 years ago? Are we even better workers than 100 years ago? Are we more, entitled, or more willing to help out and do our best and try in the aggregate? After 100 years of mandatory schooling, literacy rates have dropped. Families have fragmented, and children are increasingly disaffected, if you will. By every genuine measure of human flourishing, which include critical thinking, community belonging, moral clarity, knowing the difference between right and wrong and living it, self-direction, also self-governance, and creative capacity, the outcomes of compulsory mass schooling are way worse than they were before it was mandatory. And the system responds to this evidence by doing what? What do you see people do in town hall meetings that are recorded, in presidential debate? Somebody has a question, or like debate Charlie Kirk type of thing. What are people calling for in response to this evidence and to this information? People are calling for more schools. People are calling for more schooling, longer school days, more disciplinary rigidness. Some people are calling for like better food in the schools, right? Stop feeding the kids the unfortunate meals that they're feeding kids in most public schools. Because from inside the system's own logic, the answer to insufficient conditioning is always going to be more conditioning. And that's the point. We are trained to believe that more conditioning is necessary when the conditioning doesn't work. We often raise our children with disciplinary tactics that reinforce the idea that more conditioning is required when conditioning doesn't work. And we completely are devoid of even the notion that besides natural conditioning of, your brain works a certain way, so conditioning is unavoidable. Beyond that obvious given of a fact, that not deliberately trying to condition somebody to be this way because you want them to be that is the answer. That doesn't even come to mind. We're completely devoid of that even being a possibility. Um, you know what I mean? Sorry, I do want to see who is texting me so much and why, what's going on. Nice. Nice. Guys, make sure you do not miss the live for Wednesday, for I just confirmed a very, very special guest. And I am going to prepare some cool promotional materials leading up to it. But regardless, let's get back to this. As we said, the outcomes got worse, right? And the system's response was we need more school, we need longer days, we need more and more conditioning, because the logic is when the conditioning doesn't work, you have to introduce more conditioning. And then we have the man himself, just a cool little fun fact. Gatto resigned in the op-ed pages of the New York Times upon receiving the New York State Teacher of the Year award. He had been named New York City Teacher of the Year for 3 consecutive years. And so then he got the state one and the New York State Teacher of the Year in 1991. And he used this most visible moment of his career not to celebrate the institution, not to respect those who disrespect the children that he cared for so much every single day, but actually to call things out and publicly indict the system. The man used the man that the system honored the most became its most credible and dangerous critic publicly. And that is the definition of a witness who cannot be easily dismissed, which we need more of, right? We need more and more people like my guest for Wednesday, who I'm not going to reveal yet, but get hype. You will see tomorrow who this guest is. I just want to make sure that I can put their face and name everywhere first, but I'm hyped, man. I'm super hyped for that episode, because this is another whistleblower who was inside the system who's going to provide some super great insight into the school system and what we can do about it. And but we are here today to talk about how the inner storyteller framework, right, fits into all of this. And the first thing that we have to understand is that the 7 hidden lessons for your kids, okay, which again are confusion, class position, indifference, emotional dependency, intellectual dependency, provisional self-esteem, and constant surveillance. All of these are actually inner storyteller programming. Every one of Gatto's 7 hidden lessons is not a lesson but about a subject. It is a lesson about yourself. Confusion teaches the child that the world does not make sense and cannot be understood without an expert or some sort of authority to explain it to them. Provisional self-esteem teaches the child that their worth is assigned externally and must be constantly re-earned. And the story that plays is all of the memories of how they earned some validation from the teacher, the principal, the school system itself. Intellectual dependency teaches the child that their own thinking is insufficient. These are not academic outcomes. They are inner storyteller rewrites. Delivered daily for 12 years in a row if you take college out of the picture, and more years than that if you put college back in the picture. Before the child even has the vocabulary to identify what is being done to them or the framework that they need to resist it, they are already in for the conditioning that is explained in this slide. Okay. The school produces apathy and obedience simultaneously. The emotion or condition of apathy is not surface level. Apathy is developed over time through repeated experiences and repeated choices. Okay. And obedience is always in the now choice. But the compulsion to obey, the inclination to always obey authority is baked and caked into us until we're apathetic to each other enough to obey orders, if you will, from authority, even when the orders from authority make you step on or ignore the troubles of your fellow human beings. Gatto's indifference lesson and Gatto's emotional dependency lesson, taken together, produce exactly the combination that I identified a couple episodes ago as the two ingredients of societal control, which are apathy and obedience. The indifference lesson kills the inner fire that would generate resistance. Okay. True care is snuffed out before we're even old enough to really develop discernment for what we should be caring about. And again, true care is not just emotional. True care has to do 100% with the actions and real understanding that you have about your actions that you're taking. Deep understanding of the impact that your actions are taking, and using that understanding, understanding, if you will, to choose right action as much as possible in the direction of leaving the world a better place and leaving society in a more morally correct state than in it, how it met you. The the dependency lesson replaces the inner fire that would generate resistance with a hunger for external validation that makes the person permanently manageable, subjects you to the very vulnerability to perpetual enslavement that you thought you might have been avoiding in seeking the validation. You thought you might have been going away from uh, being looked at as just a number the more and more you tried to get the validation from the expert. A person who doesn't care, and let me say one more thing about that. And as you kept choosing to seek validation externally, you kept showing yourself and teaching yourself that that is the right thing to do. And you programmed your inner storyteller to associate validation from outside of yourself as, I was going to say, as divine validation, or as a sign that you're doing good in the world, right? When actually, of course, you can be validated as Donald Trump, and doing the things that he's doing. You can be validated as Obama, doing the things that he did. A person who doesn't care and needs the approval of experts is the most controllable person imaginable. The school system produces this combination reliably and at scale. Now, the school system is a downstream product. This is something that we have to understand. It's a downstream product of the collective inner storyteller being programmed into accepting the legitimacy or the idea of the legitimacy of government. Rockefeller and Carnegie funding of the school system did not come from nowhere. It came from a worldview or a set of beliefs about what human beings are and what we're supposed to do, what their relationship to labor and authority should be, and what kind of civilization is desirable, right? This worldview is itself, this worldview which produced the Carnegies and Rockefellers of the world, which produced the modern school system, in turn, is itself a product of the collective inner storyteller shaped through the religion of industrial capitalism, the moral authority of institutional expertise, and the authority of government or a ruling class that is entrusted with public safety and public regulation. The school system is not the root, it is the tool produced by the root. The root is the worldview, the root is the religion, which is exactly why you cannot fix the school system by reforming the school system, because reforming the school system doesn't remove the true obstacle to the solution of the problem. The true obstacle to the solution of the problem, I would say, is so far beyond just the buildings and the teachers and the written down policy for the teachers and staff to follow. It's way beyond that, right? It is in the realm of the minds and hearts of every human being, and it manifests itself in our obedience to evil systems that deplete our own energy, our self-inflicted suffering, as Mark Passio calls it. You can't just reform the school system and get rid of our obedience. You'll have to go upstream. You have to go to where the story resides, okay, to get the proper result that we're seeking. Now, Gatto identified the problem. The inner storyteller, okay, and I kind of mean my book, The Inner Storyteller. Hit the linktree /Ufulu Child. That's linktr.ee/UFULU Child. The inner storyteller names the mechanism. Now, Gatto's great contribution was describing from the inside what exactly the school system does to your children. Why you shouldn't have your kids in the school system, if you will. What he did not fully provide, and probably could not because the framework didn't exist yet, I wasn't born yet, right, is the internal mechanism by which it works, which is the inner storyteller. Why does the child accept the confusion eventually? And largely they don't at first. But why do almost all children eventually accept the confusion? Well, obviously, it's because what the inner storyteller's real function is to associate meaning with events and symbols that we encounter as we live. And if we encounter a symbol that the inner storyteller has been programmed to associate with expertise or the right answer or something like that, then we won't question it. If we've associated certain behaviors with good that are actually just obedient and not rocking the boat, not causing trouble, but they're not good, they're actually bad, because obedience and safety do not automatically mean morally correct, right? You can be obedient and on the good side of very violent people who are not being violent towards you because you keep appeasing them. But they're bad, violent people, and by you being obedient and subservient to them, you are essentially being obedient and subservient to their violence done to other people, right? Until it finally does turn on you, and then you'll get that karma. Another question: why does provisional self-esteem even take hold? Right? Because the inner storyteller is programmed to associate self-worth with the validation of the teacher or the principal or the school system itself. Why does intellectual dependency feel natural rather than alarming? The answer to all of these is the inner storyteller, right? The child's meaning-making apparatus absorbs the lessons not as impositions, but as truths about reality. And because that happens because the child so far in life, like at this stage in life, does not have another framework, right? Does not have the experience of being human and interacting with people enough to evaluate and discern what's really true and what's not. And well, that's important. If we want to get free from this condition, that's going to have to be solved. That's a problem that we have to tackle. The solution that Gatto pointed Okay. All right. Cool, 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 cool. I think we back. Let me see if. Oh, one sec. I gotta. One sec. One sec. I gotta get my presentation back real quick. Well, I'll just say it. I'll just say the stuff out loud because we were almost at the end of the presentation anyway, and we had just got to the solution slide. So, and I don't want to, just in case I have to do this whole kind of process to get it exactly how it was. I don't want to, basically waste time. Um, what I mean? I can't even find it. So I'll just tell you. Gatto found that independent study, as well as community service, large doses of solitude, meditation, being out in nature, and apprenticeships, working with somebody who's a mechanic to learn how to do mechanic duties with adults of all walks of life are the keys to helping children break the thrall of conforming society. Okay. And there is a huge body of work done by, I believe, done by a group of people who study what's called conformity bias, as well as um, I got a text message in between me, the computer restarting on me and me coming back that kind of threw off my train of thought. But there's a huge body of work that I'm going to tap into that talks about conformity bias and collective illusions. That ties directly into this. I don't think next episode, but maybe after I have my guest, we might close out the school saga with that information. But regardless, like I said, apprenticeships, large doses of solitude, community service, independent study, meaning books of your own choosing at your own pace, learning materials at your own choosing at your own pace, that kind of thing, as well as activity, walking, building things with your hands, climbing, sunbathing, survival strategies, right? Plumbing basics, um, water filtration. Here we go. I'm trying to connect these things all together, but basically learning from books and the internet on your own terms and doing activities at your own pace, connected to real things from the real world, and of course a thorough look at the history of the world in somewhat of a proper chronological order, with context and culture, where it's connected to all of the other subjects that you explore. That is how you actually educate a population. And that's not a radical new idea. It's, in fact, the oldest form of education and human development and early human development that existed, right? Thousands of years before the institutions designed to manage it. Gatto spent 30 years inside the machine, confirming what the inner storyteller curriculum is being built to restore. Now, if you don't know, the inner storyteller is not simply an idea that I have, myself, for changing how one person thinks when they read my book. The inner storyteller, on the contrary, has a whole pre-K through 12th grade curriculum design that I'm going to bring to various institutions, as well as various people who are doing projects that involve curriculum for young people, as well as, children's books, writers and illustrators, and all of this thing that aims to restore self-governance, independent learning, apprenticeship, style, structure, all of these things to what is normalized when people talk about education. Now, I didn't say I'm bringing it to normalize it within the school system, because I don't believe, just like Gatto didn't believe, that reforming the school system is going to actually bring the results that we want in the world. What's going to bring the results is the real life action that we take, starting with taking our kids out of these schools designed to do exactly what they are doing and what they have been doing over the last 100 years. Very well documented. The real world actions that we take, as well as the real world view that we hold, whether or not we have an accurate worldview. That's what's going to actually bring the change. And so, since I'm creating the framework for people to understand themselves in the most ontological level, the most fundamental level, and I'm giving language to it on all grade levels, and at all stages of learning, in a way that can connect to all subjects of learning, all possible subjects of learning can be added to with the inner storyteller framework, because that's what's being offered. There's real potential for change in this work. So I'm asking you, dear viewers and dear readers, to get your copy of the book so that you can be ahead of the curve in helping your own self and your own family, right? Anyway, a child who learns from life, nature, family, community, from doing real work with their real hands and real mouth, from real consequences, not just from a bell, is a child unfit to be a slave. Right? So take your kids out of school. If you can't yet, supplement aggressively with what the school cannot provide. Go outside, get some sunlight, get some snow, get some rain. Be careful, but get some sleet, right? Go outside, walk without a destination sometimes, without getting lost. build stuff with your own hands, with your kids. I mean, as kids and with your kids. Climb some shit, right? Be in the sun, touch grass with your feet. Learn how water moves, how to filter it, how to make weapons, how to make tools with your own hands, with outside materials, how to maintain, focus for long periods of time, train your mind, train your brain. Do all of these real world actions, and you will see that you are left with a completely new paradigm, which may contribute very greatly to the shared goals that we have in the human family, the shared objectives that we have. All right. And one last thing to teach your kids before I close this out. Make sure you like the video. That's not it. Teach your child that work and knowledge are the only two ingredients required to bring an idea to life. Okay? Not transactions. No money is required to bring any idea to life, ever. Never will. It's just not a requirement. So no transaction is necessary. No permission is necessary. Now, of course, we don't want to disregard safety. We don't want to disregard expertise. We don't want to disregard mastery and people who are masters at their craft and what their advice is. But we don't want to normalize that I can't do anything unless I have permission. Okay? You give yourself permission and you self-govern. What other barriers do we have? There's no credential, there's no license needed, necessary to bring an idea to life. Okay? Teach your children that work and knowledge are the only two ingredients that are actually required to bring an idea to life. And then bring that idea, their ideas to life alongside them and with them, and bring your ideas to life alongside them and with them. Because the inner storyteller of the parent is also being trained and conditioned to believe wrong things and to dismiss correct things. And the reconnection, the resurrection, if you will, is not just for the child. It's not just for the child's soul. It's for yours as the parent and as the adult and as the guardian and as the person who's meeting this child once and is going to give them one piece of advice ever, and then they'll never see them again. But that piece of advice is going to stick with that kid. It's for you too. Okay. And of course, everyone who went through the school system. Whew. This is this has been a wonderful, wonderful episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as me. We are an hour and a half in. I went super duper long today, but we had a whole presentation, so I hope that was okay. Also, apologies for cutting out for a second. My computer literally restarts on me every time I get to some good stuff, but it waited over an hour for me, so that's great. And I hope you guys remember to like the video, subscribe to the channels. Look out for Wednesday. Wednesday, I will have a guest on here again, and we're going to have a great conversation continuing to look at the school system. And I will see you all tomorrow for the next one. Peace and love.